Welcome to a journey through one of the most disturbing cases in the history of the Ozarks. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing to which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. In the autumn of 1909, when the leaves in the Ozark Mountains of Missouri turned copper and gold, peculiar discovery was made by local authorities in Shannon County at the Warren homestead, located approximately 7 miles east of the small logging town of Eminence. What began as a routine welfare check, following the family's sudden cessation of regular appearances in town, gradually transformed into one of the most disturbing and least understood cases in the region's history. For nearly 60 years, the details remained scattered across fragmented records, sealed testimonies, and hushed local accounts until a collection of documents was briefly examined by researchers from the University of Missouri in 1968, only to be subsequently archived and largely forgotten. The Warren family had moved to the remote homestead in 1903, purchasing nearly 80 acres of densely forested land that bordered what is now part of the Mark Twain National Forest. Thomas Warren, a stern-faced man in his early 40s with a military background from the Spanish-American War, was known in Eminence primarily for his infrequent supply runs and his insistence on handling all family business personally. His wife Margaret, described in county records as reserved and particular, was rarely seen in town after their first year of residence. The couple had no children, though Thomas occasionally mentioned distant relatives who might join them someday. According to town records examined by our research team, the Warrens paid for their property entirely in gold coins of Spanish origin, a detail that raised eyebrows but was not entirely uncommon in a region where banking institutions were still developing. The homestead they purchased had previously belonged to the Garrett Son family, who had abandoned it following a series of crop failures in the drought years of 1901 to 1902. Local memory suggested that the Garrett Sons had also experienced unusual difficulties during their tenure, though specifics were never documented in official records. The Warren property sat in a narrow valley between two ridgelines, with a year-round spring feeding a small creek that ran along its eastern boundary. The house itself was positioned unusually, not in the fertile bottomland near the water source as logic would dictate, but halfway up the western slope, built into a natural depression in the hillside that local geography would later reveal to be the collapsed entrance to a small cave system. This positioning meant that the rear wall of the house's cellar was, in fact, the natural limestone of the hill itself. Significant modifications to the existing structure were made by Thomas Warren during their first year of residence. He hired local men for the heaviest work, but insisted on performing certain aspects himself, particularly anything involving the cellar and foundation. Jeremiah Dawes, one of the laborers who assisted briefly, later told Sheriff McIntyre that Warren had sealed off a portion of the cellar with a new brick wall, offering no explanation for this modification. He worked at night on whatever was behind that wall, Dawes reported. We'd arrive in the morning and find fresh mortar and brick dust, though he claimed he'd been sleeping. What made the Warren case particularly unusual was not what authorities found inside the home during that fateful visit in November 1909, but rather what they didn't find, and the inexplicable condition of the property itself. The house stood in perfect order. Meals appeared to have been prepared, but not consumed. Personal belongings remained undisturbed. The only evidence that something was amiss was a peculiar collection of sealed jars in the root cellar, each meticulously labeled with dates and strange markings, and a series of journals written in what one deputy described as a language that resembled English, but wasn't quite right. The Warrens themselves had vanished without a trace. Most disturbing of all was the testimony of Elijah Cranford, the nearest neighbor living 3 miles away, who reported hearing voices in conversation coming from the direction of the Warren property for weeks after the couple was reported missing. Not shouting, he clarified in his sworn statement, just talking like people do at supper. But there wasn't nobody there to be doing the talking. When pressed about whether he had investigated, Cranford stated firmly, "No man with sense walks toward voices with no bodies." Cranford's testimony was initially dismissed as the imagination of an isolated man known for his fondness for moonshine. However, subsequent statements from hunters and trappers who occasionally passed through the area corroborated his account. Tobias Wheeler, a fur trapper with an established reputation for reliability, reported camping approximately 1 mile from the Warren property in late November 1909. "I heard them plain as day," he told the county clerk in a documented interview from December of that year. "A man and woman talking like they were standing just beyond the firelight. The voices moved when I moved. They stayed the same distance away no matter which direction I walked. I packed up before dawn and didn't stop until I reached Winona." In the years that followed, the Warren homestead developed a reputation. The property remained unsold despite its fertile soil and abundant water supply. Local hunters avoided the area, claiming that game animals seemed to disappear within a certain perimeter of the old house. The structure itself began to decay, but somehow more slowly than nature should allow. According to a survey conducted in 1927, the wood does not rot as expected, noted County Assessor William Harkins. It desiccates, becomes dry, and hard as stone. The initial investigation in 1909 was led by Sheriff Josiah McIntyre, whose preliminary report described the scene as unsettling in its ordinariness. The beds were made. The pantry was stocked. A half-written letter sat on Thomas Warren's desk, ending mid-sentence, "Margaret believes we finally understood the method by which the remainder was never found." What the official report failed to mention, but was later revealed in McIntyre's personal journals, was the condition of the mirrors in the Warren home. Every reflective surface, from the beveled glass mirror in the bedroom to the polished metal serving tray in the dining room, had been meticulously covered with cloth. When these coverings were removed during the investigation, deputies discovered that the reflective backing of the glass mirror had been scratched with the same curious geometric pattern found beneath the rug. The metal surfaces showed similar modifications, not random scratches, but precise, intentional alterations to the reflective properties. During our research, we uncovered records of a curious incident that occurred shortly before the Warrens' arrival in the Ozarks. Thomas Warren had previously worked as an acquisition specialist for a private collector in Boston, a man named Thaddeus Blackwood. According to employment records from Blackwood's estate, Warren was dispatched to various locations to obtain items of historical and anthropological significance. His final assignment before resigning his position was to the Oklahoma Territory in 1902, where he was tasked with acquiring Native American artifacts from the region. Further investigation into Blackwood's background revealed a man obsessed with what he called threshold artifacts, objects purportedly capable of bridging different states of reality. His collection included items from various indigenous cultures around the world, all sharing similar geometric motifs and all associated with local legends involving transitions, passages, or doorways. Blackwood's academic credentials were questionable, but his wealth allowed him to pursue his interests without institutional oversight. His correspondence with various scholars of the period reveals a man gradually moving from legitimate antiquarian interest to increasingly esoteric and fringe beliefs. What Warren found in Oklahoma Territory was never officially documented, but correspondence between Blackwood and Warren suggests a significant disagreement about a particular object. In the last letter from Blackwood to Warren, dated January 1903, the collector wrote, Your refusal to surrender the artifact constitutes theft. Your claims about its properties are the ravings of an unsound mind. Return what is mine or face the consequences. 3 months later, Thomas and Margaret Warren purchased their isolated property in the Ozarks, paying in gold coins. Our research team located banking records showing that Thomas Warren withdrew his entire savings from a Boston bank in February 1903. The withdrawal was made in person, but was flagged in the bank's records as unusual due to Warren's agitated state and insistence on gold rather than banknotes. The teller's notation indicated that Warren claimed to be departing on an extended journey and expressed concern about being followed. The most troubling aspect of the Warren disappearance was how methodically all traces of their specific activities had been removed from the property. Sheriff McIntyre noted that while personal items remained, anything that might indicate their daily routines or interests had been systematically eliminated. No books remained on their shelves, though the shelves themselves showed evidence of having been full. No photographs were found despite an expensive camera among their possessions. The root cellar contained preserved foods, but also dozens of those strange sealed jars filled with what the initial report described only as unidentifiable organic material suspended in clear fluid. One deputy, James Holbrook, described finding a peculiar design carved into the wooden floor of the Warren bedroom, hidden beneath a heavy rug. Geometric in nature with a precision that seemed almost machined rather than hand-carved, he wrote. The center of the design showed significant wear, as though someone had stood in that exact spot repeatedly. Holbrook included a rough sketch of the pattern in his notes, but the original document was damaged in a courthouse fire in 1921, leaving only fragments of the drawing intact. These fragments, when compared to similar designs documented in Blackwood's collection, show striking similarities to what anthropologists now classify as entoptic phenomena, geometric patterns that appear universally in the visual hallucinations associated with altered states of consciousness across cultures. These patterns frequently appear in indigenous art associated with shamanic practices intended to facilitate transitions between worlds or states of being. What makes the Warren case particularly compelling is the meticulous documentation of changes to the property over time. Following the initial investigation, Sheriff McIntyre established a regular schedule of visits to the homestead, carefully noting any alterations. His records indicate a property in a state of unnatural transition, certain areas decaying rapidly, while others remain perfectly preserved regardless of exposure to the elements. Most notable was his observation that the geometric pattern in the bedroom floor appeared to be slowly expanding, with new lines appearing between his visits despite the house being supposedly empty. In 1912, 3 years after the disappearance, a hunting party reported finding what they believed might be human remains approximately 1 mile from the Warren property in a small cave system that honeycombed that part of the Ozarks. However, when authorities arrived to investigate, they found the cave entrance had collapsed. Attempts to excavate were abandoned after workers reported hearing what they described as whispering from inside the rock itself. This incident was officially attributed to superstitious anxiety among the workers according to county records. One of the workers, Samuel Ledbetter, later provided a more detailed account to a local preacher, Reverend Isaiah Thompson. In Thompson's personal journal, preserved by his descendants, he recorded Ledbetter's experience. The man insists that as they cleared debris from the cave entrance, they uncovered not bones as expected, but a series of glass jars similar to those found at the Warren place. These jars were arranged in a circle and appeared to have been deliberately placed there. As the workers removed the surrounding stone and soil, Ledbetter claims the contents of the jars became agitated, moving of their own accord within the sealed containers. Shortly thereafter, the whispering began, not from the cave interior, as reported to authorities, but from the jars themselves. The cave collapse that halted the excavation occurred when Ledbetter, in a panic, struck one of the jars with his pick, shattering it. He described the released contents as like smoke but moving with purpose. The other workers corroborated this account, but agreed to a simpler explanation for official records, fearing ridicule or worse. Margaret Warren's sister, Elizabeth Holloway, traveled from Philadelphia to claim the property in 1910, but departed the region less than a week after her arrival. Before leaving, she authorized the immediate sale of the land at a fraction of its value and reportedly told the station master at the Winona Rail Depot, "I would sooner sleep in a charnel house than spend another night in this country." The property failed to sell and eventually reverted to county ownership due to unpaid taxes in 1917. Our investigation uncovered correspondence between Elizabeth Holloway and her attorney in Philadelphia following her brief visit to the Ozarks. In a letter dated May 17, 1910, she wrote, "I am now convinced that my sister and her husband have met with foul play, though of a nature I cannot explain. The local authorities are either incompetent or complicit. During my stay in that dreadful house, I experienced things that strained credibility. Objects moved without cause. Voices carried on still air, and most disturbing, glimpses of figures in my peripheral vision that vanished when directly observed. In the root cellar, I discovered Margaret's journal hidden behind a loose stone. Its contents so disturbed me that I destroyed it immediately. I will not repeat what she described, but I will say that if even half of it represented reality rather than madness, Thomas brought something back from his travels that should have remained buried. Sell the property for whatever it will fetch. I want no part of it or anything it contains." A curious footnote to this case emerged in 1935 when a University of Arkansas anthropologist named Dr. Robert Keller published a limited academic paper on indigenous beliefs in the broader Ozark region. In it, he made brief reference to a collection of sealed containers discovered in Shannon County, Missouri that contained substances consistent with those used in certain Native American purification rituals. Keller noted that such materials were traditionally used to trap malevolent influences and were typically buried at the boundaries of tribal lands. His paper speculated that the jars found in the Warren cellar might represent a misguided attempt to adopt these practices. The paper was poorly received by his colleagues and was never formally published. Dr. Keller took a leave of absence shortly thereafter and did not return to academia. Our research revealed that before his academic career, Keller had spent time as a missionary among various tribal communities in Oklahoma Territory between 1900 and 1905, potentially overlapping with Thomas Warren's time there. Keller's personal papers, donated to the university archive after his death in 1942, include fragmentary notes about what he termed threshold entities, beings that supposedly existed at the boundaries between different states of reality. He described them as fundamentally neutral but dangerous in their indifference to human existence. Keller's notes suggest that certain indigenous practices were designed not to communicate with these entities, but to establish and maintain boundaries against them. Most significantly, Keller's papers included a sealed envelope containing a single photograph labeled simply, Warren Specimen 1910. The image shows one of the jars recovered from the Warren cellar. The contents are clearly visible as a cloudy substance with distinct, organized structures floating within. A handwritten note on the back reads, "This is not preserved tissue. This is not a plant. This is not a fungus. I believe this is a fragment." Between 1909 and 1945, at least 7 individuals or families attempted to occupy the former Warren property. None remained longer than 4 months. Reasons for departure varied from unusual sounds to persistent feelings of being observed to more prosaic explanations such as poor soil quality or inconvenient location. What remains consistent in their accounts is a description of increasing unease or discomfort that many attributed to the isolation of the property. The Miller family, who attempted residence in 1922, provided the most detailed account of their experience. Jackson Miller, his wife Eleanor, and their two adult brothers purchased the property without knowledge of its history, intending to establish a small tobacco farm. Within weeks, Eleanor began complaining of insomnia due to what she described as conversations in the walls. Jackson initially dismissed her concerns, but soon reported similar experiences himself. Most troubling was their account of frequently finding themselves in rooms without remembering having entered them, particularly the bedroom where the geometric pattern had been discovered. In a letter to his sister in St. Louis dated June 1922, Jackson wrote, "There is something fundamentally wrong with the angles in this house. I know how that sounds, but I can find no better way to express it. Rooms seem larger or smaller depending on where one stands. Doorways don't quite lead where they should. Eleanor insists that the hallway to the bedroom grows longer each night. Yesterday, I measured it carefully, 16 feet 7 inches. This morning, the same careful measurement showed 17 feet 3 inches. Either we are suffering some shared delusion or this house defies the basic principles of physical space." The Millers abandoned the property in July 1922, leaving most of their possessions behind. Jackson's final letter to his sister, never previously published and discovered in our research, contains a disturbing account of their final night in the house. "We have seen them, the previous occupants. They stand in corners, in doorways, always at the periphery of vision. When directly observed, they seem to fold somehow, not vanishing, but receding into spaces that shouldn't exist. They are trying to show us something, a method, a process. Eleanor believes they want us to follow them. We are leaving at first light. Whatever the Warren discovered, whatever transformed them, we want no part of it. Burn this letter after reading." The last family to attempt residence was the Peterson family in the summer of 1945. Harold Peterson, his wife Ruth, and Ruth's elderly father purchased the property at auction, unaware of its history. Within weeks, Ruth began complaining of someone moving things when we're not looking. Harold reported waking to find his father-in-law standing motionless in corners of rooms at night, though the elderly man had no history of sleepwalking or confusion. In September of that year, Harold Peterson arrived in Eminence alone, appearing disoriented and unable to clearly explain where his family members were. When authorities accompanied him back to the homestead, they found it empty. Ruth and her father were never located. Harold Peterson was briefly held on suspicion of foul play, but was released due to lack of evidence. Before leaving the region, he gave a statement to local newspaper editor Franklin Mosley that was never printed, but was preserved in Mosley's personal papers. "They are still there in the house. Not Ruth and her father, the others, the Warren. I heard them talking through the walls. They found a way to step sideways somehow. They are watching from somewhere just next to where we are." Peterson was committed to the state hospital in Farmington the following year, where records indicate he refused to sleep in a room with closed doors until his death in 1957. Medical records from Peterson's time at the state hospital, which our team obtained through a Freedom of Information request, reveal a man not suffering from delusions but from an acute form of spatial disorientation. Dr. Emerson Clark, his primary physician, noted, "Patient exhibits consistent confusion regarding physical relationships between objects and spaces. He insists on maintaining visual contact with doorways at all times and becomes severely agitated when his view is obstructed. Most notably, he demonstrates an unusual form of prosopagnosia, the inability to recognize faces, but in a highly specific manner. He recognizes individuals perfectly well from the front, but becomes terrified when viewing the same individuals in profile, insisting they are someone else looking through from the other side. Despite extensive treatment, these symptoms have proven resistant to both therapy and medication. The property was subsequently condemned by county authorities and left to deteriorate naturally. In 1962, a forest fire swept through portions of Shannon County, but inexplicably circled around the Warren homestead, leaving it untouched while burning forests on all sides. Local fire officials attributed this to a change in wind direction, though meteorological records for the day indicate steady winds from the southwest. Aerial photographs taken during the fire control efforts show a perfect circle of unburned forest surrounding the Warren property approximately half a mile in diameter. Fire scientists consulted by our team could offer no conventional explanation for this pattern, particularly given the uniform fuel load of the forest and the consistent wind conditions reported throughout the event. One expert suggested that some property of the soil might have increased the moisture content of vegetation in the area, making it more resistant to burning, but soil samples taken in 1968 showed no significant difference from the surrounding region. The most significant development in understanding the Warren case came in 1968 when a team of researchers from the University of Missouri, led by Dr. Caroline Shepard, initiated a project to document historical homesteads in the Ozarks. Upon examining county records related to the Warren property, Dr. Shepard became intrigued by the unusual nature of the case and obtained permission to visit the site. Dr. Shepard, a respected anthropologist with a particular interest in folk beliefs and practices, assembled a team that included 2 graduate students, a photographer, and a local guide familiar with the terrain. Their expedition was planned as a 3-day examination of the site with comprehensive documentation of any remaining structures and artifacts. University records indicate that they departed Columbia on October 3, 1968, well equipped for their intended research. What her team discovered has never been fully disclosed. Their preliminary report, filed with the university on October 9, 1968, noted that despite nearly 60 years of abandonment, portions of the structure remained standing and the root cellar was largely intact. Among the artifacts recovered were fragments of the journals mentioned in the original 1909 investigation. Dr. Shepard noted that the writing was indeed English, but written in a peculiar reverse style that required a mirror to read properly. The few deciphered passages made reference to the thinning and visitors from the adjacent place. The report includes transcriptions of several journal fragments, including one particularly disturbing entry attributed to Margaret Warren, dated August 1908. Thomas insists the process is controllable, that with sufficient preparation, we can step through and return safely. I remain unconvinced. What we have glimpsed watching us through the mirrors seems neither malevolent nor benevolent, merely curious in a way that makes me deeply uneasy. The jars continue to fill, though I cannot say how. We sealed the last one this morning, 15 now in total. Thomas says we need at least 24 to complete the circle. I have begun to dream of spaces between spaces. Most significantly, the team discovered a hidden compartment beneath the floor of what had been the Warren bedroom containing a small metal box of unusual composition. The box held a single item, a smooth stone object approximately 6 in length, cylindrical, covered in markings that Dr. Shepard preliminarily identified as possibly related to certain Siouan linguistic groups. The report indicated that the object would be transported to university facilities for further analysis. The report also detailed an unusual phenomenon experienced by the team during their stay. On their second night at the site, all 5 members reported hearing what sounded like conversations coming from the ruins of the house, though no one was there when investigated. The team's photographer, David Kellerman, reported that his equipment malfunctioned in specific areas of the property, film exposures showing inexplicable distortions, audio recordings containing sections of silence punctuated by what he described as whispering too faint to decipher. Most disturbing was Dr. Shepard's account of finding one of her graduate students, Michael Collins, standing motionless in the remains of the Warren bedroom at approximately 3:30 a.m., facing the corner where the geometric pattern had been documented. When approached, Collins reportedly turned to Dr. Shepard and asked, "Do you see how the angle opens if you look at it correctly?" He had no recollection of the incident the following morning. 3 weeks after filing this report, Dr. Shepard requested an immediate leave of absence from the university. Her team's materials were placed in storage pending her return, but she never resumed her position. Attempts to locate her by university officials were unsuccessful. The artifacts recovered from the Warren property, including the stone object, were listed in the university's inventory, but were reported missing during a routine audit in 1969. The remaining documentation was archived, and the investigation was effectively abandoned. Our research team located Michael Collins, now a retired English professor living in Portland, Oregon. His recollection of the expedition remained vivid despite the intervening decades. "We should never have stayed overnight," he told us in a recorded interview. "The place had a wrongness to it that's difficult to articulate. Distances seemed inconsistent. Sounds didn't travel normally, and there was a persistent sense of being observed from just outside your field of vision." When asked about the incident, Dr. Shepard reported, "Collins became visibly uncomfortable. I have no memory of standing in that room. What I do remember is the dreams that started that night. Dreams of a place that was almost, but not quite, the clearing where we were camped. In this place, everything was slightly wrong. Trees bent at impossible angles, colors that had no names, and there were figures there watching. They looked human until they turned sideways. Then they weren't." Collins confirmed that the team had indeed found the stone artifact described in the report. "It was warm to the touch," he recalled, "even though it had been buried in cold earth for who knows how long, and the markings, they seemed to shift slightly when viewed from different angles, revealing new patterns." Dr. Shepard became obsessed with it immediately. She would stay up late making drawings of it from different perspectives, claiming that the full pattern could only be understood when all possible views were compiled. "The last time I saw her, she showed me her composite drawing, a geometric structure that seemed to fold in on itself impossibly. She claimed it was a map of sorts, though to where I couldn't say." In a curious postscript to this phase of the story, a librarian at the university recorded receiving a package from Dr. Shepard in December 1968 containing only a handwritten note that read, "Some doors once opened cannot be closed. The Warren understood too late. I understand now." The note was filed and forgotten until our research team uncovered it while examining records related to the case. Further investigation revealed that Dr. Shepard's vehicle was discovered abandoned on Forest Service Road 317, approximately 4 miles from the Warren homestead site, on November 12, 1968. Her personal effects remained in her university office, including several notebooks containing her research on the Warren case. These notebooks, which had never been properly examined, contained detailed drawings of the geometric patterns found at the Warren homestead, alongside similar designs documented from various indigenous cultures worldwide. Dr. Shepard had annotated these comparisons extensively, developing what appeared to be a theoretical framework for understanding them as representations of non-Euclidean spatial relationships, essentially maps of ways to transition between different states of space. Her final notebook entry, dated November 10, 1968, reads, "I understand now why the jars were sealed. They were trying to contain it, piece by piece, but some things cannot be contained once recognized. I hear the Warren at night now, whispering just behind me. They've been trying to get back for 60 years. They say I can help them. They say it's too late to close what they opened, but perhaps not too late to cross over ourselves. Tomorrow I go back to the homestead one last time. May God forgive what I'm about to do." Dr. Shepard's car was found abandoned on a Forest Service road approximately 4 miles from the presumed location of the Warren homestead. No trace of her has ever been found. In the decade since Dr. Shepard's disappearance, the Warren case has faded into local legend. A ghost story told around campfires, a whispered warning to avoid certain parts of the forest after dark. The scientific implications of what they might have discovered remain unexplored by mainstream research. The connections between their work and modern theoretical physics unexamined. Yet, the pattern continues. Between 1968 and the present, Shannon County records show at least 7 unexplained disappearances within a 5-mile radius of the Warren property's presumed location. In each case, extensive searches yielded no results. In 3 instances, personal belongings were found neatly arranged, as though the missing individuals had simply stepped away momentarily and never returned. Local residents still report occasional sightings of a well-dressed couple walking at the forest's edge in the late evening light, a stern-faced man and a woman in blue, visible for a moment and gone the next. Some claim to hear distant conversations carried on the wind from uninhabited sections of the forest or glimpse lights among the trees where no structures stand. The forest has reclaimed the physical traces of the Warren homestead. But something of their presence lingers. The boundary they breached, the doorway they opened, if the fragmented records and testimonies are to be believed, remains accessible to those who know how to look for it. Or perhaps more disturbingly, to those whom it chooses to reveal itself to. Perhaps some mysteries are best left unexplored. Perhaps some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again. The story of the Warren family stands as a somber reminder that in the remote corners of our world, where silence reigns and isolation breeds its own reality, the boundaries we take for granted may be more permeable than we care to believe. And if you ever find yourself in the eastern reaches of Shannon County, where the forests grow dense and the valleys run deep, listen carefully to the quality of silence around you. The locals say the Warren are still there, standing just out of sight, watching from somewhere just adjacent to our world, waiting for someone else to understand what they discovered, and perhaps in understanding, to join them on the other side of the thinning. In the spring of 2023, a hiker reported finding an antique glass jar at the base of a tree in what might have been the vicinity of the Warren property. The jar was sealed with wax and contained what appeared to be cloudy water. Before authorities could retrieve it, the hiker claimed to have heard whispers coming from the jar itself. Frightened, they left it where they found it and departed the area. By the time a forest ranger investigated the following day, the jar was gone. The ranger noted in his report that while searching the area, he briefly observed what appeared to be a woman in outdated clothing standing among distant trees watching him. When he called out to her, she turned sideways and vanished from view. The ranger attributed the sighting to a trick of light through the forest canopy. He did, however, make one unusual notation in his official report: unusual silence in the area. No wildlife observed or heard. Recommend routine monitoring, but no cause for concern. the Warren case remains officially unsolved. One of many mysteries lost to time in the remote corners of the American wilderness. Yet, in those densely forested hills, where cell phone signals fade and GPS coordinates sometimes contradict themselves, locals still give certain areas a wide berth. They have no need for scientific theories about brands or membranes between realities. They simply know that some places belong more to the other side than to this one. And that the Warren, wherever and whatever they have become, are still watching from just beyond the edge of perception. The boundaries may be thinner than we imagine,